The smell of roses still clung to my hands the morning I decided to fight back. Harold's roses, deep crimson, stubborn blooms that refused to die even after he did. I'd been trimming them at sunrise, wrapped in his old flannel shirt, when I first heard the sharp metallic snap of a tape measure behind me. "You're over the limit," a woman's voice declared, smooth as polished steel. I turned and saw her, Bryn Sterling, the new president of the Pinewood Estates HOA. Silver Tesla idling at the curb, designer athleisure like armor, eyes that scan my yard the way a predator studies prey. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't offer condolences. She pointed to the cedar fence I'd spent 2 sleepless weeks building. Harold's last project sketched in his handwriting, now standing as our sanctuary. 6 foot 2 inches, she said. Regulations allow 6. Remove it or face fines. I wiped soil from my palms, slowly, deliberately. Show me that regulation. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see," she murmured, snapping the tape measure closed like a verdict. When she walked away, I thought of the funeral, how neighbors I barely knew brought casseroles, while Harold's chair sat empty in the kitchen. I thought of the bourbon waiting inside, Harold's favorite, and the long nights I'd spent staring at the half-built fence, wondering if finishing it would hurt less than leaving it undone. Bryn Sterling's heels clicked down the sidewalk like gunfire. And something inside me, the part of me that had spent 20 years staring down murderers and liars from a federal bench, clicked with them. This wasn't about a fence. Later, I found her name in old court files. Sterling Premium Builders. Fraud allegations. Contractor scams. The memory came rushing back. A slick defense team in my courtroom, and a ruling that had cost her husband $30,000 and his license in 2 counties. I poured bourbon over ice and whispered into the empty kitchen, "This is revenge." By the next morning, a thick envelope arrived. Notice of violation. Memorial stone unlawful. Mailbox color non-compliant. Bird feeder attracting pests. Fines totaling more than most families made in a week. And it wasn't just me. Walt Henderson, who'd lived here since 1965, told me she tried to force him to tear down his porch swing. Non-uniform structure. The Rodriguez family had sold their home after being fined for a Virgin of Guadalupe statue. A single mom down the street got cited because her kids drew hopscotch squares in chalk. Pinewood used to be a place where retired teachers tended gardens and blue-collar families raised kids without fear of bureaucratic tyrants. But Bryn Sterling came armed with bylaws like bullets, determined to purge anyone who didn't fit her vision of perfection. I buried Harold in May. By October, I was burying my patience. That night, I went down to Harold's basement office, the one that still smelled like pipe tobacco and old legal books, and opened a folder labeled HOA. If she wanted war, she'd chosen the wrong widow. I knew how to read regulations line by line until they unraveled. I knew how to find pressure points in any system, legal or personal, and I had nothing left to lose. The glow of my desk lamp pooled across photographs of Harold's garden, his handwritten notes on fence heights and flower beds. A manila envelope of certified letters sat unopened at my elbow, but I didn't need to read them. I already knew the pattern. Intimidation dressed as authority. What Bryn Sterling didn't know, couldn't possibly understand, was that grief sharpens you. When you've watched someone you love die with more dignity than most people live, petty tyrants lose their power to scare you. By midnight, I'd mapped out everything I need. Statutes, case law, evidence preservation protocols. I was done being a target. Somewhere outside, a cardinal, Harold's favorite bird, sang into the darkness. I took it as a sign. The next time Bryn Sterling came for me, she'd find a judge waiting. And not the kind who wrote checks for fines. The kind who wrote sentencing orders. The notices arrived like clockwork, certified mail, thick envelopes with official HOA letterhead. The kind printed on expensive paper to make lies look legitimate. I stacked them on Harold's old oak desk without opening them, telling myself I'd handle it later. But the harassment wasn't just paper. On Tuesday morning, I came home from court to find 2 strangers pacing my yard with clipboards. A wiry man in neon gym clothes was jotting notes about non-uniform vegetation. while a skeletal woman in white pointed at Harold's roses like they were weapons of mass destruction. Bryn stood behind them, sipping a green smoothie, giving orders as if my property belonged to her. "This is a memorial garden," I told her, voice steady from years of sentencing felons without flinching. "This is an HOA violation," she said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, I sat in the garden long after sunset, running my fingers over Harold's memorial stone. I could almost hear his voice. "Don't let them push you around, Miriam. Fight them fair, but fight them hard." The next morning, Walt Henderson appeared at my back door with his old pipe and a worried look. Walt had lived here longer than anyone. His back was bent with age, but his mind was sharp as glass. "She's been after everybody," he whispered. "Single mom on Sycamore got fined for her kids drawing hopscotch. Rodriguez family? They sold and moved to Phoenix after she called their Virgin Mary statue visual clutter." I poured him coffee, black as his tobacco. "She's targeting people who can't fight back," I said. He nodded, eyes dark. "You're the first one who can." By Thursday, the harassment turned personal. I pulled into my driveway to find the back gate wide open. Gavel, my 14-year-old tabby, Harold's final gift, the cat who'd sat on his lap through chemo, was missing. Panic hollowed me out. I searched alleys with a flashlight until dawn, calling his name until my voice cracked. Walt organized neighbors to help. Even the Rodriguezes drove in from Phoenix to look. 3 days later, I found Gavel at Mountain View Animal Emergency, barely breathing, ribs broken. Dr. Martinez looked grim. "These injuries, they're consistent with being chased. Machinery, maybe lawn equipment. He's lucky to be alive." I didn't need to guess who left the gate open. My new security cameras told the story in high definition. Bryn herself, pink tape measure in hand, strutting through my yard like she owned it, and leaving the gate deliberately unlatched. An hour later, her landscaping crew arrived with industrial blowers, terrorizing my old cat into a storm drain. That night, I sat in Harold's office, staring at the footage, rage humming under my skin like an electric current. 20 years on the bench had taught me to control my temper, to separate anger from justice. But when I watched Gavel's tiny body carried into the clinic, I felt both at once. A dangerous combination. I filed unlawful entry and animal cruelty charges the next morning. Bryn laughed when the sheriff served her notice, then mailed me 2 more violation letters, as if daring me to keep fighting. That was the moment I stopped thinking of her as an annoying neighbor and started treating her like what she was, a criminal. Patricia Donnelly appeared on my porch that evening carrying a plate of oatmeal cookies. 60-something, silver hair, hands that shook slightly when she wasn't holding coffee. Retired FBI, though you'd never guess from the cardigan and soft smile. "I've been watching her," Pat said simply. "Bryn Sterling's not just an HOA bully. She's running something bigger." She spread photographs across my kitchen table. Bank records, property transfers, evidence of money moving where it shouldn't. 3 identities. 2 bankrupt shell companies. HOA funds missing. It's a pattern: Colorado, Arizona, Michigan. "You're just her latest distraction." Walt's voice floated from the doorway. "Judge, you take her down. You're saving this whole neighborhood." I looked at Harold's picture on the wall, his smile steady and kind. I thought of his roses, of Gavel trembling under oxygen at the vet, of neighbors living in fear of pink tape measures and forged bylaws. I'd buried Harold 6 months ago. I wasn't burying anyone else. The first folder went into my briefcase that night. Statutes, complaint forms, everything I need to turn her intimidation into federal evidence. Bryn Sterling thought she'd found another victim. What she'd actually found was a judge who knew exactly how to turn grief into a weapon. Rain hammered the roof like a jury delivering a guilty verdict. I sat in Harold's basement office, lights low, watching the same 30-second clip of Bryn Sterling trespassing through my yard. Again and again, pink tape measure glinting in the camera light. Her smirk caught perfectly as she left my gate swinging open to the wind. Gavel purred faintly from the blanket on my lap, still recovering from cracked ribs and dehydration. Each shallow breath was a reminder. This wasn't HOA politics. This was cruelty with intent. Pat Donnelly leaned over my shoulder, her cardigan sleeves rolled up like she was still on bureau payroll. "She's escalating," Pat said. "That's what cornered animals do. But she's not just a bully. She's running a pattern." She spread photographs across Harold's desk, a deck of crimes dealt face up. HOA budgets drained in 3 states. Families forced to sell under pressure. Insurance payouts arriving right before mysterious fires. Sandra McKenzie, Beth Sterling, Bryn Ashworth. Same woman, different names. I stared at the faces, the signatures in different handwriting, the bank records flowing like poison water. "How much?" I asked. "For million over 10 years, Pat said. 15 neighborhoods gutted. Yours is just the next on the list." Something in me broke open, not from shock but from recognition. I'd spent 20 years on the bench sentencing people just like her. Predators who didn't just steal money. They stole peace, dignity, lives. "This isn't about me," I whispered. "She's been hunting vulnerable people the whole time." Walt appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his old canvas jacket. "Judge, we got another letter," he said. His voice shook, but not from age. "She's finding the Johnsons $500 a day for their wheelchair ramp. Calls it a non-uniform modification. Their boy can't even get into his house now." Gavel shifted weakly, his frail weight pressing against my arm. That was the moment the grief that had been hollowing me out since Harold died turned into something solid, sharp, and deadly clear. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was leading a prosecution. The next morning, I walked into Pinewood Estates like a soldier walking into occupied territory. My black umbrella sliced through the rain, the memorial roses shining behind me like drops of blood. Bryn was waiting in her driveway, perfect blowout untouched by weather, sipping another absurd green smoothie. "You should resign from the bench," she said sweetly, voice carrying across the street. "Save yourself the embarrassment. I have friends in high places." I stepped closer until the rain blurred her spray, tan into streaks. "You don't scare me," I said, "but you should be terrified of me." For a second, I saw it, the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. Then she smiled all teeth. "Careful, Judge. People who fight me usually regret it." By that night, my kitchen had transformed into a federal war room. Pat was on speakerphone with an interstate fraud task force. Rebecca Morgan, a former federal prosecutor I trusted with my life, drove down from Denver with 3 paralegals and a case strategy so tight it could crush a diamond. "Harassment's your bait," Rebecca said, spreading color-coded folders across my table. "But the real case is financial crime and conspiracy. We take her down for the pattern, not just the fence." I nodded, feeling Harold's presence in the hum of the new security system Pat had installed. We were building something stronger than any cedar barrier, a wall of evidence she couldn't climb. Then came the call that turned everything inside out. "Judge Blackwood." The voice on the line was low, urgent. "Fire Marshal Jake Morrison. We got an anonymous tip about your property. Someone says your house is unsafe, electrical risk, potential fire hazard. They want an immediate inspection." I froze, pen hovering over my legal pad. Morrison continued. I checked the records. "The complaint came from your HOA president. And the wording? It's not about safety. It's about preparing paperwork for a disaster." Pat looked at me sharply. "She's not just planning to ruin your life. She's planning to erase you." I walked out to the garden in the rain, letting it soak through Harold's flannel until I was trembling. The cedar fence stood steady, raindrops sliding down its rails like tears. For months, I'd been holding my grief like a shield. But now it was a sword. I whispered to Harold's roses. "She wants a fire? Let's give her one she can't put out." This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was open war, and I was done playing defense. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the air felt charged, the kind of heavy stillness before a storm breaks. I hadn't slept. Instead, I'd spent the night cataloging every violation letter, every security clip, every bank record Pat had dug up. The evidence formed neat rows on Harold's old table, but inside I was anything but neat. When you've buried the love of your life, you learn how to sit with grief. But rage? Rage doesn't sit. It paces, claws, and waits to be used. Walt brought breakfast I didn't touch. "Judge," he said softly, standing in the doorway with his weather-beaten hands shoved into his jacket. Neighbors are scared. Johnsons are talking about selling. Mrs. Morgan hasn't slept in days. You're the only one who can stop her. I looked at him. This man who'd lived in Pinewood since the 60s, who'd carried a community on his back long before HOA boards came with letterheads and threats. We will stop her, I said. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. At noon, the inspection crew arrived. 2 unmarked trucks. Men in coveralls, too professional to be landscapers, too quiet to be contractors. My upgraded security system caught everything. Fuel canisters unloaded in broad daylight. Hose lines snaked around the property like vipers. Bryn stood at the curb, giving an interview to Channel 7, voice syrup sweet. We're just concerned about neighborhood safety. When officials ignore fire risks, innocent families suffer. The brass of it made my teeth ache. My house wasn't a risk. It was her target. And now, the world had a front row seat. Fire Marshal Jake Morrison walked the perimeter, shaking his head. Judge, he murmured, crouching near the foundation. These aren't safety issues. They're accelerant highways. Someone's prepping this place to burn. Pat's jaw tightened. We needed confirmation. Now we've got it. I swallowed hard. How long do we have? Days. Maybe hours, Morrison said. This is professional work. Whoever planned this isn't just committing arson. They're staging it as an electrical failure. You'd never make it out alive. That night, the war room came alive. Rebecca Morgan's paralegals built timelines sharp enough to cut through any courtroom excuse. Federal agents phoned in from Denver, recording every step. Walt's neighbors became a quiet surveillance network, noting license plates, snapping photographs from porches. We hit her on 3 fronts, Rebecca said, eyes blazing. Federal fraud, civil rights violations, attempted murder. The evidence is airtight, but we have to catch her in the act. Pat looked at me over her glasses. This is going to get dangerous. You ready for that? I nodded. She already hurt my family. I'm not giving her a second chance. Still, later that evening, when the house was quiet, doubt slipped through like cold air under a door. I sat on Harold's memorial bench, gavel curled against my side, and felt the weight of it all. What if we were too late? What if Bryn struck before the warrants were signed, before federal marshals could move in? I remembered Harold's voice, steady and kind, even in pain. Miriam, you've spent your life making hard calls. Do it again. Don't let fear make them for you. By midnight, everything was in motion. Federal surveillance vans parked discreetly at the edge of Pinewood. My house, Harold's house, was wired for evidence collection so thorough it could turn a crime scene into a courtroom exhibit by sunrise. And still, the pressure didn't let up. Bryn's latest letter arrived at dawn, slid under my door rather than mailed. A personal touch that made my skin crawl. Final warning. Remove violations or face consequences you won't see coming. I held the letter until my knuckles went white. Then I folded it, slid it into an evidence bag, and whispered into the quiet kitchen. I see you coming just fine. Pat tapped on the window, voice low but fierce. It's tonight. I can feel it. I looked at Harold's picture on the wall, the soft smile that never left his face, even in the worst days of chemo. Then let's make tonight count. The trap was set. The question wasn't whether Bryn would come. It was whether she understood whose house she was walking into, and how prepared a widow with nothing to lose could really be. The night broke with a sound too quiet to be innocent, the low hiss of tires rolling slow on wet pavement. I sat in Walt Henderson's guest room across the street, curtains drawn just wide enough to see my house glowing under the moonlight. The memorial roses swayed in the cold wind like they knew what was coming. Pat Donnelly crouched near the window, binoculars steady in her trembling hands. 2 trucks, she whispered. No lobos. Same crew from yesterday. Rebecca Morgan's voice crackled over the encrypted line. Units are in position. No one moves until we have them on tape. The truck stopped. For figures in coveralls slipped out, working in synchronized silence. They moved with precision, laying fuel lines against my foundation, wiring propane canisters under the kitchen window, placing dead vegetation like kindling along Harold's roses. My chest tightened, but I kept watching. I had to. Then Bryn Sterling herself appeared, designer jacket gleaming under streetlights. Walking like this was just another HOA errand. A Channel 7 news van rolled up seconds later. She was staging her own alibi in real time. Judge Blackwood has ignored repeated safety warnings, she told the camera, voice syrup smooth. This property is a danger to everyone in Pinewood Estates. My jaw clenched. She was condemning my house while her men wired it to explode. Pat, I whispered, tell them to move in now. Rebecca's voice cut sharp. Not yet. We need her touching evidence. We need her fully tied to it. The seconds stretched like wire pulled too tight. I could feel every heartbeat in my teeth. One of the crew slipped inside through the back door. The same door Bryn had left open when Gavel disappeared. My cat pressed against my legs now, sensing the tension, ears flat. Cameras got them planting accelerants, Pat murmured, checking the live feed. Federal gold standard. We got her cold. Then Bryn made her fatal mistake. She walked up my porch steps herself, carrying a clipboard like she owned the deed. She crouched near the door, unscrewed a porch light, leaving her fingerprints, and taped a bright pink final notice to the glass. My glass. Harold's glass. Rebecca's voice snapped over the line. Now! The darkness erupted with sirens. Black SUVs cornered the trucks. Federal agents poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands that split the night. The crew froze mid-sabotage, hands up, floodlights catching their faces in blinding white. Bryn turned, confusion flickering into horror. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked human, panicked, cornered, small. Miriam, this is a misunderstanding, she shouted across the street as marshals closed in. I was protecting the community. I stepped out onto Walt's porch, rain plastering Harold's flannel to my shoulders, voice steady as the gavel I'd held for 2 decades. You tried to burn me alive, Bryn. You tried to burn us all. Federal agents tackled her to the ground as she tried to run, her green smoothie spilling across the pavement like a smear of mockery. The camera from Channel 7 caught everything. The HOA queen in handcuffs, the pink notice still flapping on my door. Inside the chaos, the propane line hissed. Fire Marshal Jake Morrison sprinted forward, cutting valves before the house went up. The smell of gasoline stung the air, acrid and bitter, a warning of how close I'd come to losing Harold's home and my life. When it was over, the trucks were impounded, evidence sealed, and Bryn sat cuffed in the back of a federal SUV, rain streaking her perfect makeup into dark rivers. But Edalet solder sucking. That's it, she whispered. We got her on everything. Arson, fraud, conspiracy. She's done. But standing there, soaked to the bone, I didn't feel victory yet. I felt something heavier, the weight of how far a human being will go when they believe no one can stop them. Bryn's eyes found mine through the tinted glass as the SUV door slammed. Hatred burned there still, unbroken. She mouthed 3 words I read clear as day. This isn't over. I pressed my hand to Harold's roses, trembling in the cold. Oh, it's over, I whispered. You just don't know it yet. And for the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt him with me. Not as memory, but as fire. Not the kind Bryn tried to set. The kind that burns out everything rotten and leaves nothing but light. The gallery was standing room only. Federal marshals, reporters, neighbors who'd been living under a thumb. I sat in the second row this time, not behind the bench. I'd recused myself the moment charges were filed, but I wasn't here as a judge today. I was here as a victim and as a witness. Judge Patricia Morrison presided with the same calm gravity I'd known since law school. Her voice carried like a bell. The people of Colorado versus Bryn Ashworth Sterling, also known as Beth Sterling, also known as Sandra McKenzie. The clerk read the charges. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, conspiracy, multi-state fraud, civil rights violations. It took 4 minutes just to list them all. Bryn kept her chin high, but her eyes darted like a cornered animal. When her turn came, she made the mistake of speaking. Your Honor, this is a vendetta. Miriam Blackwood weaponized her position against a law-abiding homeowner. Judge Morrison leaned forward, voice like thunder in still air. Miss Sterling, the evidence includes surveillance footage of you planting accelerants, financial records tracing millions in stolen funds, and testimony from 17 families you terrorized. You're not a victim. You are a predator who mistook fear for weakness. The gallery murmured, and Bryn's mask cracked for the first time. I watched her hands shake as she was remanded without bond. For all her arrogance, she finally understood. There would be no smooth exit, no deal, no bluff strong enough to beat the truth. The trial that followed was swift. Federal prosecutors dismantled her defense like a rotten beam under Harold's careful hammer. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her on every count. Her husband drew 25 years for conspiracy. She got life without parole. The morning of sentencing, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen watching cardinals at Harold's memorial feeder. The garden had bloomed again, brighter than before. Neighbors brought clippings, seeds, whole rose bushes to replace what the fire scorched. Walt built a new cedar fence with his own hands, calling it bulletproof against bullies. Even Gavel, my scarred old cat, had healed enough to reclaim his post on the windowsill. But the real victory wasn't just mine. Every family Bryn targeted received restitution from the seized Sterling accounts. The HOA was reborn under Walt's leadership, its bylaws rewritten to protect instead of punish. What once was fear had become community. Months later, the state passed new legislation: mandatory HOA transparency, financial audits, civil rights oversight. National networks called it the Blackwood Act, though I'd fought against that name. This wasn't about me. It was about every ordinary person who'd been told to stay quiet while someone in power abused the rules. The ripple spread farther than I ever expected. The Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship, funded by restitution, book proceeds, and donations, sent its first student to law school that fall. Maria Rodriguez, whose family had been fined out of Pinewood, stood in my kitchen the night before she left for Harvard, tears in her eyes. "I'm going to make sure people like her never get this far again," she said. I hugged her hard. "Then it was worth everything," I told her. People ask if I feel safer now. I tell them safety isn't the point. Community is. And community is something Bryn Sterling could never burn down, no matter how many accelerants she carried. Sometimes I sit outside at dusk when Harold's roses glow in the last light. The cedar fence creaks softly in the wind, and I can almost hear his voice. "You fought the right fight, Miriam. You didn't just win. You made sure others could, too." Justice, I've learned, isn't about revenge. It's about restoration, rebuilding what's good, stronger than before, so it can't be broken the same way twice. The night Bryn was led away in chains, I touched the memorial stone and whispered to Harold, "We're home again." And for the first time since I buried him, it felt true.